All right, without further ado, here begins our fireside chat between Ambassador Theros and Deputy Assistant Secretary Huck. Thank you.
Thank you all for inviting us to be here today. Joshua, Mr. Huck, is involved with Cyprus and other very important issues to the United States that I was involved with about 50 years ago.
Yes.
So this sort of sets the stage for how long I've been here and involved with this, and it's great to see the new people, the younger people coming up in the Foreign Service who've contributed enormously. I'm going to put in a plug for the Foreign Service. I spent 36 years there, and I think that the role of diplomacy is vastly underestimated in this country. So anyway, that was my... So I will start off. I was going to ask Mr. Huck if he could just speak for a few moments in general, and then we engage in a conversation.
That sounds great. Let me just, you can hear me? Great. So first, thank you, Ambassador, for the introduction. Thank you for being here with me, and also a big thanks to Nick Laragakis and the whole AHI team for setting this up and for inviting me here. I really appreciate it. It's also great to see so many familiar faces, friends, colleagues that I've had a chance to work with, particularly two of my favorite ambassadors here in the House, three of my favorite ambassadors in the House. But really, it's great. There's been an enormous amount of work we've been able to do together over the past years that I've been working on Cyprus, so it's great to see everyone here. I just want to say, as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State inside the European Affairs Bureau, I cover a swath of Europe from Azerbaijan in the east out to Malta in the west, includes Turkey, Greece, and of course Cyprus. But Cyprus is one of the issues that I really look forward to engaging on the most, not only because it's an issue I've worked on now for several years and really feel passionately about, but because it's an issue that we've had so much positive momentum on. We've had tangible successes. We've seen changes not only on the island, but in our bilateral relationship that are really important and are long lasting. And I think that many of those, unless you're folks, and I know many of folks in this room fall into that category of people who watch this space closely, but for folks who don't, a lot of this I fear has been missed or overshadowed by other events in the region. So I really appreciate the chance to delve deep on that and really talk about some of the things that we've accomplished, how we've gotten here, and where we can go in the future. And I'll just say a final word that as we're talking through some of these things we've accomplished and how different the relationship is now from where it's come, I'll be speaking from the State Department perspective, but I want to stress that this is absolutely a team game. This is by no means something that any one person or even an agency, one department can do alone, or even one side of the relationship. This is something that has taken an interagency, bipartisan effort on inside the U.S., including this administration, previous administrations, the executive branch, the legislative branch, but then also close partnership with all of our really, really close and excellent partners in Nicosia, the Republic of Cyprus, but then also with our great ambassador here and our excellent ambassador, Julie Fisher in Nicosia. So team effort and really an effort that has paid great dividends. So we're happy to delve into each of some of the areas in more specifics, but just wanted to lay that out at the top.
So, great. Ambassador. In my case, I'm particularly happy because I was in at the beginning, so to speak. I was working for Secretary Kissinger the night that the invasion began. And I have seen an enormous transformation in U.S. policy. And could you sort of walk us through how the transformation took place? Because at the time of the arms embargo, the relationship was actually pretty frigid, if not worse. There were actions taken against Cyprus, such as an arms embargo, which fortunately has since been lifted. The United States, if I remember correctly, vetoed a couple of resolutions at one point or another, and suddenly we are, somebody my age, suddenly we are the greatest of friends. And this is the greatest of friends that has expanded to Greece as well. So, how did the evolution take place from such a frigid atmosphere up?
No, it's a great question, and of course, there's no one answer to it, and I know that could be a theme for many of the discussions throughout the today and tomorrow's events, and I know many of the speakers here have a lot of background that could elucidate that from various perspectives, cultural, economic. I'll look at it from the foreign policy perspective and talk a little bit about my thoughts on it, but there's no one answer, and I think this is worth a detailed discussion. From my perspective, looking at it, I think I would look at one sort of a change of mindset on the U.S. side, a change of mindset on the Republic of Cyprus side, and then a bit of shifting dynamics in the region, all of which I think played a part in this. And of course, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go too far back in history here, but just take, say, the last 10 years or so. I do think on the U.S. side, there was a sense that as much as we had invested in the Cyprus problem, trying to resolve what is still an overwhelmingly difficult, incredibly important issue to resolve, the division of the island and how we can find a way to unify Cyprus, we cannot then neglect the bilateral relationship. And that as we do one, we need to also be doing the other. And I think there was a mindset change in the US that we really needed to invest more deeply in the bilateral relationship. And so there's no one point that you would look at there, but or there's many points that you could pick. I think you could go back to 2018, the bilateral statement of intent on security cooperation as a starting point. That one agreement in and of itself wasn't a game changer, but it started the process of many significant steps on security, but also across the board that have led to really important changes. So building on that, we had our first the first defense attaché from the ROC here in Washington. We then lifted the restriction under ITAR for defense and commercial sales. We've had the the state partnership program between the National Guard of New Jersey and the National Guard of and the Republic of Cyprus. We had the then new steps to bring Cyprus into the IMET program, International Military Education Training Program, our premier military training program that brings not only kind of short-term training, but really long-term training for our partners at the highest level to bring our two armed forces into conformity. So all of these steps were incremental, but really significant, and based, I think, from a U.S. perspective, that look, we need to invest more in this bilateral relationship. It matters to us, even apart from the Cyprus problem, which matters also greatly to us. So I think that's part of the thinking going on the U.S. side. I think on the Cyprus side as well, I do think for many years Cyprus was some would have described it as a hedging state in the sense that it enjoyed a very strong relationship with Russia. And with other partners around the region. And while it valued, I think, its relationship with the United States, it was not the only relationship that was important to Cyprus for, obviously, historic reasons. And so I think that also there's been a change in that as well from the Republic of Cyprus side, and committing more fully to a close partnership with the United States as an EU member as well. Its commitments and its relationships in the EU, I think, have played a part. So I think both of those, the changes from the two sides have been important, but then finally kind of the changing dynamics in the region. So you've got a closer relationship between the United States and Greece, deeper integration of Cyprus into the EU, and then all of the dynamics and instabilities that you've seen in the Middle East as well, Ukraine and Russia. I think those things have also kind of brought into stark relief for both sides that we need each other, that we can benefit through closer partnership, and that the kind of the status quo in the past wasn't really sustainable for Cyprus to have both a good relationship with Russia and a good relationship with the United States. So I think those things were all kind of mixed, and over time have led us to really understand and appreciate the partnership to a better extent than ever before.
Excellent. We're going to be shortly starting strategic dialogue with Cyprus, which is a major step forward, milestone in improving the relationship between the United States and countries with which we conduct strategic dialogues. It is not, how can I say, a relationship that's extended to as large a number of countries in the world as you might think.
Yeah.
But for this audience, could you talk about, first of all, what is a strategic dialogue, and then how do you see it playing out in the future of the relationship with Cyprus?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, of the many things, I know that Nick recapped them well, some of the many big developments we've had this year, including, the first Oval Office meeting for a sitting Cypriot president in over 25 years, really major development. We've had extended our defense roadmap for another 5 years under our defense cooperation roadmap that's between the DoD and their counterparts in Cyprus. We've also had this first ever strategic dialogue. And so, we get asked sometimes, what does that mean? It sort of sounds like another meeting. Does it really matter at all? It does. It really does. Because when you look at the way that states interact with each other, really close partners and allies have structured engagements with each other, where we run through the full gamut of issues that matter to us and to our Now, for other states, if without that, it ends up being much more ad hoc. It doesn't mean important conversations don't happen, but it's more ad hoc. It's less comprehensive. It ends up being, whenever the two leaders or senior officials happen to be near each other, or it's done at the working level in the two capitals. Not to say work can't get done that way, but it's not the same. And so we haven't had that with Cyprus before. We have it with nearly all of our other really important partners. And so we jointly saw that, look, there is a real need for this and there's real value. So what do we do in these things? Like, what does it matter? Well, I was just out there this last October. The assistant secretary covering all of Europe and I went out. And it was a chance over a day and a half to address all of the major issues in the relationship. Things that, in other cases, for example, we have extensive discussions on Ukraine, for example, with our NATO partners and allies. Of course, Cyprus isn't a member of NATO, so isn't a part of those discussions, but needs to be because it's affected by some of these things. So we have a chance to go through those discussions on issues like Russia and Ukraine, issues related to the Middle East. We hadn't had a structured dialogue with Cyprus in the past on the Middle East, but Cyprus is clearly geographically, while obviously culturally, politically a part of Europe, geographically, essentially in the Middle East and affected deeply by what happens there with close connections, interests, and ties at the leader level as well inside the Middle East. So we both benefit from understanding and having those discussions with each other. So we ran through that full gamut of issues as well as economics, energy, cultural issues, education, things that matter to ordinary people's lives. We had a few significant developments coming out of that. I can rattle off some, but for example, rule of law cooperation was a big focus now. One of the things that under our agreement to lift the ITAR restrictions was both an agreement that the Cypriot government would no longer allow Russian military ships to visit, be refueled or be serviced, cementing that pivot away from Russia that I mentioned before, but also steps to improve the combating money laundering, to improve financial transparency under the Financial Action Task Force list and things like that. So one of the things we announced under the strategic dialogue was bringing in a resident legal advisor and an assistant legal attaché to be resident at our mission in Nicosia to help facilitate that process and support the government. We also announced additional funding for our Fulbright program to bring more Cypriots to the United States to study and vice versa, and also discuss other ways that we can improve our educational exchanges. We signed the Artemis Accords, which is an agreement for the kind of rules of the road for peaceful and responsible commercial development in space. And then we also, maybe most importantly, had really significant progress in our discussions on visa waiver program. And Nick mentioned this earlier. We don't have yet, an announcement we can make on this, but we've completed two really important kind of stepping stone agreements that paved the way to this. And it's something that we, our partners at DHS, our colleagues on the ground in Nicosia are working on nonstop. And really, personally, I look forward to the day when our Cypriot friends can come to the United States for business or for tourism without a visa. And so in addition to kind of using a strategic dialogue to talk about these high-level issues of state security, defense, and so on, also using these engagements to talk about the things that really matter to people. Things like visas, education, business, cooperation on a day-to-day level. So that's just, and honestly, those are just the high points. There's quite a lot that gets discussed, and the best part about these kinds of things are that we can make them regular. So the goal is to have these once a year, and then we have a regular standardized touch point where we can continue to build on these and every year advance these lines of effort further.
It really is a sea change in the relationship. How do you see the relationship perhaps in 5 or 10 years? And particularly, let me back up a second. Active efforts by the United States government to solve the Cyprus problem have clearly fallen behind the curtain. It is not terribly visible at the moment. I know that the diplomacy never ceases, but what is your prognosis for the possibility of some really positive developments in bringing together a final resolution to the issue?
Yeah. So Cyprus problem, this remains, I think for everyone in the room is familiar with how difficult, how painful, how heartbreaking the situation has been and remains. And this is something that we are clearly have stressed over and over again. The status quo is not acceptable. We're not okay with how things stand, and we need to continue to make efforts to find a resolution. Just to kind of restate U.S. policy on this, I think folks are aware, but we support a Cypriot-led, but UN-facilitated process, comprehensive settlement that will lead to a unified Cyprus under a bizonal, bicommunal federation with political equality that will lead to prosperity and benefits to all Cypriots. Now, I do say Cypriot-led there because I think that's important. I think we've seen in past rounds, for example, under the Annan plan, this was something where a solution was imposed from the outside. Doesn't work. Needs to be Cypriot-led. So this is something we continue to support and feel strongly about. I know President Christodoulidis has prioritized this issue, and we've supported him in his efforts. I mentioned UN facilitated because the U.S., while we care deeply about this issue and remain very involved, we are not a guarantor power. The UN has a presence on the island and a direct mandate to do this. And so we do actively support their efforts as well. That doesn't mean that we can sort of hand it over to them. We need to be very actively involved and have been, but we do see an important role for the UN. So some of the developments that have taken place recently, as the UN Secretary General held a meeting with President Christodoulidis and Mr. Qatar, and they had obviously I wasn't there, but they have, from what all accounts, were an open and useful discussion that importantly led to a plan for further meetings, then in an expanded format. And that's, again, no guarantee of success. Talks don't necessarily lead to solutions, but coming from a very difficult period where very little was happening between the two sides, that is one mark of progress. Of course, the other thing to look forward to is eventually there will be an electoral process happening in the north, and it remains to be seen whether Mr. Qatar stays in his position. So that will be another thing to watch. I do think it's hard to prognosticate, and to your point about looking out in the future, it's very hard to do. I do get asked sometimes whether or not we think the kind of our administration change will affect things. And on that, I really think that it will not. I really think when you look back at the policies of previous administrations, both Republican, say going back to President Trump's first term, he was very committed to support for Cyprus. The current administration has been, as I've just laid out all of the things that we've been doing over the last 4 years, very committed to Cyprus and this issue set. And then you look in Congress, and there's been bipartisan support going back to the East Med Act and before. So I think on that front, we'll have solid support. So when you kind of look out, I think the one constant can be strong U.S. support in this area. I think overall, the positive trends in the Greek-Turkish relationship could also provide beneficial atmospherics. It's no guarantee of success, and I'm not guaranteeing a straight line positive improvement in that relationship either. That will be, in the hands of those two countries to work through those issues. But I think all of those pieces are give some room for I don't even want to say optimism, are bases on which we can have solid engagement going forward on this issue, and are reasons to think that we can be successful in moving this forward.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned what appears to be, if not a rapprochement, at least a calming in temperatures between Greece and Turkey, because you took away one of my punchlines of Cyprus being the only tail that wags two dogs.
That's it. That's right.
But again, in the same area, how do you see the development of energy resources around Cyprus? Not the economic side so much, though that is very important, but how do you see it affecting any possibility of reconciliation or resolution?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the economic and energy issues. I mean, I think these are really important. And I do think also sometimes get overshadowed a little bit by the security, the foreign policy issues, and others. These are really important. Important to the people of Cyprus, important to the long-term health and stability of the region. So, first, I'd say that from a U.S. government standpoint, we're very committed to developing that relationship, building our both economic, trade, and energy partnership with Cyprus. We see that as a key piece of the bilateral relationship. Right now, I think bilateral trade is something like a little bit less than $4 billion, something like that. But I think I see a lot of room to grow. I see a lot of potential to build that out. That's goods and services, by the way. We already have some really large and significant U.S. firms there. That includes firms like IBM. We have a Hill International construction firm, PIMCO Investments. Just recently, GE Aerospace did a big deal with a local Cypriot firm, United Aerospace Maintenance Company. That's really significant, and I think a potential area that we can really continue to build on there. So we see that as really important. On energy specifically, of course, we've got we have Chevron, who's been there for several years now, working on the Aphrodite field and preparing what is in line to be a multi-billion-dollar investment there, which could be really important for the future, not only of Cyprus but beyond, as both Cyprus and the broader EU are working through this really dynamic period of change in the energy landscape, where Europe is trying to chart a path forward that is both involves decarbonization, reducing the total carbon footprint, but also prioritizing diversification from Russian sources. So both of those are happening at the same time, and Cyprus can play a really important role in that. And then there's the interconnectors as well. So like Great Sea Interconnector, for example, potentially connecting Greece and Cyprus. And the other interconnector projects that are out there as well potentially put Cyprus at a really interesting intersection of this future energy roadmap in Europe, and given its location with the Middle East, also make it potentially very important as a connector from the Middle East as well. All of those things, though, are long-term. They require long-term investments. They require a lot of foresight from the government and close cooperation between business and government. So one of the things we've been really working on is helping to advocate for U.S. businesses as we do, but also to ensure that there's a level playing field, that businesses there understand how they can go to the Cypriot government, get the resolutions that they need. We really want to make sure we're moving forward in the relationship and not back, that our companies who are there feel supported, feel comfortable and confident in making long-term bets on Cyprus, billion-dollar bets in some cases, and then to use those examples to bring additional firms over. We do think there's a real potential for firms that maybe U.S. firms or others that may be based in the Middle East, but that but given the dynamics there, may be interested in moving to slightly, still staying nearby, but staying, moving somewhere that they may feel more comfortable from a security perspective. And Cyprus could make a really interesting landing zone for them. We're also doing a lot to encourage Cypriot investment in the United States. So that's another thing that we want to. I think that's an area with a lot of potential as well. So all of those are parts where we're kind of building out. And I really just think that on the energy side, most important thing is to actually move forward with the development.
Is, do you bring these up when you're discussing this with the Turks? And what do they tell you? And then also, would you advocate, as we've had in the past, would it be helpful to introduce again a State Department Cyprus coordinator to the process?
Thank you, Nick. So first, on share your frustration with comments about a two-state solution. And you mentioned that it's a non-starter for the Republic of Cyprus and Cypriots. Let me be clear, it's a non-starter for the United States. Flat out, it is a non-starter. The two-state solution will not work, it will not fly, it's not helpful, and to the question of do we raise it, we absolutely raise it. And I've been very clear with counterparts that when two-state solution is suggested, not only is it not helpful, it frankly kind of reduces the credibility of the conversation being had, because it's not a possibility and it's not a useful way forward. So let me be 100% clear on that. So now, where do we go from here, though? I think the real question is, obviously, there's both the Turkish Cypriots and there's Ankara. And I think it's important to understand and engage both. I think the conversations taking place in the UN that the UN Secretary General just held are useful, but not sufficient. I do think it's important that Ankara is part of the discussion. I think it's important that all of the guarantor powers are part of the discussion, Greece as well, the UK as well, and ultimately continue to put that, not only the pressure, but continue to encourage all sides to see where their long-term interest lies and how the status quo really does not benefit anyone. And that's why both the United States and international partners can't rest until this problem is ultimately solved. Look, it's a difficult issue set, there's no question about that, but this is one where the United States is absolutely committed. We're very encouraged, or we're encouraged by the fact that the UN has been able to convene these recent meetings. I know the Republic of Cyprus has representatives have talked about that. I know this is something that they're committed to as well. And so we'll see where that goes, and the United States will continue to support that process. I think I'll leave it there. Oh, Cyprus negotiate. Yeah, I mean, honestly, look, if we got back to a position of discussions or actually ongoing negotiations, there is the lack of bandwidth from the United States to engage on it. You don't have to worry about that. Absolutely, the U.S. will be there, will be committed and fully 100% invested in that. Right now, I think, honestly, the lack of movement is not from a lack of U.S. interest or from having a person to engage. I mean, there is some intransigence that's just simply there. It doesn't matter how many people that you send to give the same talking points. So what we have needed for a while is a kind of a new start on a process. And I do think the UN process led by the Secretary General is a step in that right direction. But believe me, in terms of kind of the positions, yeah, if this process gets legs and as it goes forward, the U.S. will absolutely, I'm confident, adapt to make sure that we've got the right people there at a senior and left level engaging at any point we need to.
Can you take one more question?
Sure.
Keep it,
Yeah, and then I will have to go, but yes.
Thank you for your presentation. Elizabeth Prodromo, Boston College, former USARF commissioner from 2004 to 2012. I wanted to ask about something symbolic and its practical consequences. I wanted to introduce the term missing in this conversation thus far, which is occupation. And if one looks at the State Department Human Trafficking Report, the Religious Freedom Report, the Human Rights Report, that term is also absent from all of those reports. And instead, there's this euphemistic, the area administered by the Turkish Cypriots. And so I wonder from the perspective of your office, whether you think that's a very helpful sort of discursive flourish that avoids the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And then I wanted to move under that rubric to the question of malign influence and the way in which the occupation zone is an area of malign influence when it comes to both hard and soft security concerns for both the United States and Europe, those related to human trafficking as well as to trafficking in small arms, money laundering, and also likely religious extremists.
Thank you. So, I mean, one on the kind of semantical question, I understand the note of that, but let me be completely clear. The United States recognizes one sovereign state on the island. It's the Republic of Cyprus, completely clear. The U.S. has no formal diplomatic engagements of any kind with the North. We do recognize a Turkish Cypriot community. There are two communities on the island, but there's one sovereign state. That's who we deal with, and that's very clear. I mean, you can, in terms of specific words, at the end of the day, the reality is what it is, and I think we've been very clear about who we will move forward with in partnership, where we will make sure we are benefiting the people of Cyprus, and frankly, our commitment to make sure the longer-term issues underlying the division of the island get addressed, because that's ultimately the goal for everyone here. But speaking to that, I mean, to the second part of your question, I think that just highlights why the status quo is in no one's interest. That the status quo as it stands, it does facilitate and unfortunately exacerbates problems such as illegal trafficking or transnational crime in general. That's something we track very closely and we're very concerned about. This is something that we have relevant international organizations that look at these issues, but because of the divided state of the island, cannot be addressed as well as they should be. And that is something that we're very concerned about and working to address. And ultimately, there's some steps that we can do now, but ultimately, the only way that we tackle those issues firmly and decisively would ultimately be a solution for United Cyprus. So thank you. I wanted to say thank you again to Nick and to Ahi for arranging, and thank you very much. Really